Thank you all for joining us for this week's episode of The X Factor. Today, we're going to discuss a topic that's near and dear to many of your hearts, and that is stepping into a business that's transitioning from founder-led to founder-inspired. I'm your host today, Lizzie Jordan. I'm a vice president in our search leadership team at Falcon. And today, our guest is Peter Clare, a private equity veteran who currently serves as CEO of Heritage Group-backed Reload. Previously was president of K1-backed JobBite. And Peter, before we dive into the meat of our conversations, tell our audience about you and how you got to this point being CEO of Reload.
Super. Well, thanks very much for having me, Lizzie. Really excited for today's conversation. My background is essentially just over 2 decades in building software for recruiters and hiring solutions for companies of all shapes and sizes, including staffing companies, including corporate entities from the world's largest global banks down to 2-person recruiting shops. And I have probably 2 hours I could go through every machination of 20 years of doing that. But I think what's most germane and relevant to this conversation is we had a company that serviced the large enterprise in recruitment marketing in 2018 that we sold to K1. That they then pulled together with 4 other businesses, and it was an immediate roll-up situation where we had 4 companies of various different sizes, various different cultures that service various different markets. And so, at the highest level, without getting into too many of the specifics of the revenue, you kind of had a 100-person company that was very focused on large enterprise, which meant it was very buttoned up and very suit and tie in terms of how it operated. That was the company I came from, Telemetry. We also had JobBite, which was at the time the flagship brand, which had grown from small business, more of a Silicon Valley-based culture, high flying, very well-known, reputable brand. And there was a 4 or 5-person startup, true startup that had some really amazing AI chat-based technology that had 5 people in it. And then there was another company that was at about 20 people that was based in London. So we had a real challenge to manage of how do we get these various very different cultures together on the same page and into a high-flying, high-performance business. Over the course of the 4 years that I was part of that, there was an additional 4 companies that were brought into the process. So I'm happy to share as we go through, but 4 of the 4 businesses had founders that had to be managed through the process, and then similarly with the other 4 that came in through later. At early 22, I met up with you, Lizzie, and I found the opportunity to join Reload as their CEO. And I'll share just a little bit with the group the thought process that I went through in that. During that process and during that time, and I can share how that worked out, and then I'll let you poke in on sort of whatever you want out of all the rest of the experiences. But specifically, when I was taking the leap from president of a business unit into CEO of an organization, having been through the roll-up of essentially at that time 7 companies in 4 years, there was a couple of things that were just the top of my list that were most important. And the first one, and this is kind of the title of the webinar, is what is the founder going to do? Why is the founder leaving? Is the founder being pushed out? How does the team feel about the founder? How does the private equity company feel about the founder? And so a big part of my thought process was to understand what type of a transition was going on here. Had the founder had enough? Was the founder looking for somebody to cradle their baby and take it to the next level? Or was there conflict there? I think the answer to that, as I was evaluating, the answer to that could have been any of the above. It could have been a situation where there was a massive amount of conflict. It could have been a situation where everybody in the company hated the founder. In our case, I was very lucky that we had a situation where the founder really wanted to have somebody brought in that could take the company to the next level. And it worked out really well from his perspective to try and bring in somebody that had played at a higher level before. But again, the thought process was to really know what I was stepping into as the most important piece. From there, then I wanted to understand what was the culture of the team, what was the degree to which the founder was going to be missed, the degree to which the founder was going to be involved. Was it going to be an executive chairman type of a situation? Was it a member of the board? Was it a cheerleader on the sideline, advisor to the CEO? So again, in my case, we were very fortunate. We transitioned our founder to the board of directors, and he has been phenomenal throughout. So he's been a great advisor, but very hands-off, and has been helpful when needed. We went through the first 8 to 12 weeks where we were meeting very regularly to help me get up to speed quickly. And then now to this day, and it's been 2 years as of I think 2 weeks from now, we still meet every second week to check in outside of our regular sort of board cadences. So a couple of things that I found, once we got in, are probably no surprise to anybody that's been through this before, but these are some of the things that I would really suggest folks key in on and try and learn as much about as possible. Is, to what degree is the business running on the sheer strength of will of the founder? And it's usually very high. Even for some of the larger companies, there's a personality, a driven nature of the entrepreneurs that can hold things together in an unreasonable way. That usually means that there is a lot of opportunity to professionalize the business, to get better KPIs in place, operating rhythms in place, et cetera. So understanding, how much of the business is running as a professional business versus through sheer force of will is number one. Then number two is, are you in a situation where the company has been operating more like a family than a professional sports team? And by that, I mean, some people get a little bit of extra benefit of the doubt, let's say, other people don't. And then to what degree, if you're thinking about things like remote operations and remote folks, to what degree, is everybody in the same region with the same thought process and the same groupthink in the organization? And then lastly, to what degree can they take change? Change management is one of the biggest pieces. And what I've found in my experience is a lot of time entrepreneurs and founders change a lot of things really quickly. And that's part of the drive, and it's part of what makes them special. But that ends up meaning that people can often have a lot of change fatigue, and a lot of changes that are made aren't given enough time to sort of marinate and deliver results. So I found, again, in our situation, as I came in the door, there was a degree of change fatigue, but there was an excitement for change to be adopted that would be more methodical. I found that the culture was very, very much a reflection of the founder, and was a very friendly culture, very, very nice people, wonderful professionals to work with. But there was no clear operating rhythms, cadence, processes, et cetera. So the process that we went through was actually fairly straightforward. What I did was I asked all of the departments to sort of present their business. So here's how I run, here's what I measure myself on, or what the company measures me on. I didn't give them a format for that. I just said, you kind of come in and do this. And I got, as you would imagine, sort of from the engineering team, I got an incredible, operating manual of a very fixed process that they run, incredibly efficient. Marketing, I think there was, 4 bullet points on an Excel sheet. And there was kind of everything in between. So we then went through the process of thinking about, okay, let's separate ourselves and the human beings from this process, and let's work together to figure out what are the functions that the company needs, what are the processes that are needed, how do the different departments operate with each other, what are their interfaces, and then what are the governing factors, how do decisions get made, and then we'll figure out what roles we need to deliver all of that and who has the right skills to fit in those roles. And this is a methodology I've used a couple of times, which is very, very effective to say, forget about the people for a second. What needs to get done? right? And how are we going to measure it? And how do we need to communicate? Because again, we had a business where, as a result of being founder-led, often things are pretty siloed, and everything goes up to the founder to make a decision. And what I noticed coming out of a much larger sort of transformed organization was that nobody questioned anybody else. So sales was sales, sales was what sales was doing, engineering was what engineering was doing, marketing was what marketing was doing. And that was a real limiting factor to the organization, that folks weren't able to figure out how to help each other, figure out how their interfaces with one another could make 1 + 1 = 3. And so we set about the work of building out that operating model and getting people on board with a regular routine cadence. And a big part of that was just giving two things that I'll highlight that we did. The first was building an operating rhythm so people knew where decisions were being made and where they could send their sort of issues and requirements to. So everybody knew that, of course, if an emergency happens, everything's off the board, but everybody knows that we make product decisions on Friday mornings, and there's a product committee that meets on Friday mornings. So that's where we will funnel those types of issues. Management meets on Monday, those types of things, and then really sticking to it because the company had no operating rhythm. And I always think about, as you can see, the guitars and everything, I think about it in terms of music, and you've got I think about the meetings that you have and the frequency and the precision with which you do those is like the rhythm section in music, that it just has to be steady and has to be on beat so that all of the other wonderful stuff can happen. And then what we did, because we had the typical sort of founder culture where there was some favoritism, I don't think it was necessarily even overt, but it was pretty clear once I got in. We built a Change Champion Network. And so the Change Champion Network essentially sat down and we rewrote our cultural values, and we wrote the cultural values for the team that we wanted to be versus the team that we were. And as we went through building the cultural values, then we built a values champion every month so that we could celebrate the people that were exhibiting those behaviors effectively. And we ultimately started to use that in our performance reviews, and all of the various ways in which we communicated and managed the company was based on the foundation of who we wanted to be in that process. So that's the sort of the high level intro, Lizzie, and I'm happy for you to kind of dig into any of those threads that make the most sense for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, we'll move it to Q&A in about 10 minutes, but I think what I'm curious about is change is always difficult, and it sounds like you need pretty drastic changes. How did you go about implementing that? Was it a Band-Aid right off in the first month? I'm sure there was probably some, talent changes, some up-leveling and maybe some releasing of folks. Like, tell me how you kind of, you're taking command from Matt, how that went up down at Priva.
Yeah, so I generally have, I can remember consistently telling folks in my previous companies that when they were coming in, I would say, look, you're going to see things that seem really stupid. I'm going to caution you to maybe not say anything until you fully understand it, because sometimes things are a little bit stupid for a reason. So if you're in business, you're in the business of solving problems. They never end. And you can't solve all of them. So, in my view, a well-run business solves the most important problems. And often if you come in and you start pointing out every little problem, people are going to go like, they're just going to think that you're attacking their baby, right? And so I've always said, 90 days, you got to take 90 days to really understand what's going on, find out what are the broken things that are broken for a reason, and what are the broken things that you need to fix more quickly. General PE timeline is fast, so you don't have a lot of time to soak it in. You can't sit around for 6 months, but getting to that kind of 30 days to observe, 60 days to marinate, and then the next 30 days to get the formal plan and run is a really thoughtful way to make sure that you're making the right changes. Now, what I found when I got in, and that sort of 90-day time frame has worked for me in the past. When I got to this company, we had to go faster, and we had to go faster because the team was really thirsty for the change. So I was cognizant of not wanting to be the one that was coming in and saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, and this is wrong. But in actuality, everybody, including the founder, was like, please fix it, go as fast as you can, right? So I had the luxury of every stakeholder wanting to go faster. And I will tell you, some of the learning is I should have maybe gone a little bit slower in spite of everybody asking me to go faster, because we made a couple errors. We changed a few things that we ended up ultimately changing back. And I think that was a result of me not understanding it well enough. Now, in terms of the people question, that's where the cultural values come in. There was a severe lack of accountability in the organization. And so we overtly talked to the team about accountability. We went through some fairly rudimentary, but training on what accountability means, right? And we made sure that everybody had their accountabilities understood and documented. And we just said to people, we're going to hold you accountable to these cultural values and these set of metrics and these set of behaviors. And so we didn't have to go through a process of, there's 10 people that we just have to fire. People very quickly, when you set the parameters and hold firm to them and they're well communicated, will opt out very quickly. We did have a couple of key members of the executive team that I identified early were folks that we needed to move on from. And we had to go through a process there. There was definitely a process aligning with the PE firm around, what are the challenges and the reasons and the thought processes behind this. And there was also the same process with the founder in terms of, what I was seeing and what I was expecting out of the next level of talent that we wanted to bring into the organization. So over the course of the last 2 years, I'll tell you that only I think 15% of the people that were in the organization when I got here are still here. We went through a lot of
85% moved on.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And the team leaner today, bigger when you started?
The team is definitely leaner today, but revenues are up. So there was some significant efficiency gains. And for those on the phone that are in the healthcare, software, healthcare staffing software market, they'll know that healthcare staffing is not doing well in general. We have continued to outperform the market, and we've reduced the team size significantly. And what we were able to do, frankly, it wasn't an intentional reduction in force, but what we were doing is we were taking sort of, as 3 people left, we replaced them with 1 more senior person. And so we were able to target the type of talent that we needed because we had the framework that said, this is the skills that we need, and these are the functions that need to get run at a better level over time. So, if anything, we went slower than we should have. I think we should have made some of those moves faster. And as a first-time CEO, that's on me for not pushing hard enough to do the things that I knew likely needed to be done. And so, learning process for us, definitely. But I think it was almost entirely based on, once you set clear accountabilities and clear processes and sort of make sure it's clear that you expect them to be followed, people start to opt out. And again, I didn't create the accountabilities in the bubble. We went through the process of what do we need to be able to run a great business? What do we need to do to be able to be proud of what we do every day? And then we ask people, after they helped create the process, to sign on to it. And it's hard for people that haven't had a lot of accountability to suddenly be held accountable.
That's for sure. And we're getting a couple questions. One's asking, any early signs you saw from folks you knew you needed to move on from? And did you lose anyone you thought was super talented that you would have loved to have kept?
I think that's a really good question. So I think we had lots of really talented people that aren't with the company anymore, but I don't think we lost anybody that I felt was critical to what we were building at all. So, again, I think one of the things that I say a lot is, I don't have to say it now because we've got the culture that we want now, but I used to say, look, this is who we're going to be, and if that's not for you, that's okay. That doesn't make you bad. It just means that we're evolving this company in a way that doesn't suit you, and so I would often invite people to have a conversation with that about me if they wanted to do an organized transition out of the business because they didn't agree with where we were going or what we wanted to do, and also often ask them to challenge me what's wrong about it. And so, I think we didn't lose. My view is we didn't lose anybody that was absolutely critical.
Clearly, yeah, if you're outperforming the market.
Yeah.
One piece I wanted to talk about is strategy, which you and I talked a bit about. Founder-led business, founders are very kinetic. They have a lot of ideas. They have that kind of force of will. And you touched on this, where maybe things were getting rolled out and then rolled in, maybe not being properly A/B tested. So investment is getting put into marketing or sales efforts and then not being really followed through. How did you kind of evaluate that and come in and bring some process and real evaluation to marketing, go-to-market spend, et cetera, and different projects you're going to roll out?
Yeah, so we didn't implement like the Amazon 6-page plan or anything like that, but we did put in a process where we created quarterly objectives, and we put in a process weekly to check against the quarterly objectives anything new that came up, right? So that we could say, great idea, is it more important than one of these things, or do you have the capacity to add it? And we would go through a rationalization process where we would allow people to argue for their point, and then ultimately make a decision to change the objectives because there was something that we felt warranted a change, or that we could put them in the parking lot and they'd have to get picked up again next quarter and evaluated against all the other options. So that was the primary thing that we did, is just have an intentional process for whether we were going to do something different or not. And we definitely, through that process, completely halted the pull out the wires and see what happens type of project management. But we also, I will just say, we're not, we didn't implement a certified project management process or anything like that. We are nimble still. We still go fast. We still rationalize and change things, but they have to be rationalized is the key.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. Question in the audience that said, you mentioned there were some mistakes while trying to drive change. Just asking for maybe some specific examples of what you would have done differently.
Yeah, I think I said one of them. I think there was some folks that were very, very talented people, but weren't right for the business. And I think we should have gone faster on making those intentional changes. I think that the second, so one of the second mistakes that we made is there was a lot here that there was a lot here that I was told was running fine and didn't need to get touched, and it was good, and the revenue numbers looked good. And so I let those continue to run, and I should have inspected them at a deeper level. I think that's one. And then I think there was some ones that I think would be kind of hard to give cadence to, but there was, for example, in our business, we do, contract staffing delivery, we do permanent hire delivery. And the way that we had that organized, we consolidated the two, and it probably would have made more sense to keep it separate. There's lots of good reasons to consolidate it on the surface, but once you dug into the business deeply, it would have been better to keep it where it was.
Backing up to your time at JobBite, that being a platform which so many of our audiences are on different, platform roll-ups. Mm-hmm. How do you manage some of the integration with founding executive teams? I'm sure some people probably rolled off, but what did that look like in terms of kind of maintaining that entrepreneurial DNA and being able to build great products for your customers, but while also kind of putting them in a more formal process-driven organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So the four founders, by the time I left, only one of them was still in the organization and was in a partnership role, not running their original company. So two of them had transitioned to advisory roles and then rolled off of that, and one of them transitioned into a board role for a short period of time and then rolled off of that. So, I think it's very much sort of a repeat of the same story. It was, we need to organize how we do the work. We need to do that in absence of our past and our history, and then decide who does the work going forward. But I would say, at the executive level, it was just a lot of really hard conversations. We did things like bring in external facilitators to make sure that the real conversations were happening, that the conflict was properly surfaced, so that we could eliminate the politics. And then beyond that, it was these are the accountabilities, and here's how we're going to go about our business. And I would say, to anybody in there that's going through a roll up, just interesting facts. So, I talked about with the JobBite roll up how there was 4 different companies of varying sizes. The CEO and founder of the company that was less than a year old and was brought into the roll up was the CEO of the overall organization 4 months later, right? So the size of the company that you're coming from doesn't dictate who wins the sort of I colloquially call it management survivor. But I would say that it's really important for all the executives that are listening to realize that you could have come from the smallest company, and you could end up as the CEO, or as in my case, the president, in a short period of time, or you can think that you're the acquirer and be out shortly thereafter. So, my advice always is to really make sure that going into any of these roll-ups, going into any decision like I made to move companies and take a step up, is to really get clear with the investors and with the owners. What is the investment thesis? What are you actually here to deliver? Because it changes from when you're not in a PE-backed company, because in a PE-backed company, they've got to answer to their LPs, and they have sold those LPs on a vision for a thesis, whether that thesis is we're going to take the company to the enterprise, whether we're going to consolidate the market, whatever it is, you better know what you're actually striving for, because that's what they're going to measure you against. Now, of course, to achieve that, you always have to balance that with delivering a great service for your customers, delivering the right kind of growth, delivering a great experience for your employees, so that it's all tied together. But if you are not aligned to the investment thesis, and if you're not executing against the investment thesis in all of your decision making, you're not going to be there for long.
Yeah, I think we see this a lot with acquisitions where there isn't sometimes not as much clarity on data and metrics in these businesses until they're getting acquired and integrated. Like when you were doing, the acquisition of JobBite, how did you get everyone to have, quote unquote, one truth, where they're all kind of focused on the North Star of the business? And did you have FP&A or ops? Like, how did you guys get there?
Yeah, so that was in that case, I mean, we had a very sophisticated private equity firm that had a reporting package. So this is your reporting package, and you had to kind of backwards engineer into that. And so that's the easy part in terms of getting the investors the information they want. But then what we had to do was figure out what were the day-to-day KPIs that we were going to, review every single morning to make sure that we were on track to that, whether that was number of outbound phone calls for an SDR, number of implementations in red and yellow, all of those translations down. Was working deeply with the FP&A team to try and figure out how we could effectively measure if we were on track or not on a daily basis. And in the case of JobBite, which is a bigger platform, we had a large enterprise business that was focusing on serving companies over 75,000 employees, and we had small businesses there. So that included having to segment out, your sales metrics, for example, in large enterprise sales. All the deals come in at the end of the quarter. That's just the way that it is, right? So we had to be really thoughtful about things like, for the SMB, it worked really well to have a daily sales dashboard, because if you get behind by one day, you have a problem. Whereas in large enterprise, it's not going to change week to week, right? In significant ways. So there was a lot of work that went into understanding how we roll the KPIs down to an individual level, so that everybody knew what they were supposed to focus on to achieve the ultimate goal.
And the KPI is then driving culture, it sounds like too, where it's kind of like everybody's being accountable for the same things, very clear, very transparent. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the transparency is really important. So where, when we were in offices more, the leaderboards and the metrics were really important. And I'm glad you kind of stayed on this topic so I could remember probably the most important point. When I came into Reload, they had, and we still do have, every report imaginable in Power BI. I mean, our Power BI contractor that we work with, I think in like Latvia or something, is amazing. There is no missing metric. But I would look at it and I didn't know if it was good or not, right? So we had all the data, but there was no visibility into, is this good?
Yeah.
Does this mean that we will be on track for the quarter and for the year, or not? So it wasn't just about the data and the KPI, but it was about showing and making it visible, where everybody was at relative to the plan. And being way ahead of plan isn't ideal either. Being behind plan's worse. But the degree to which you can build in a continuous culture of getting the plan right, where you're not, you're not overly optimistic, but also not pessimistic and sandbagging, instead calling it straight up the fairway.
Yeah. And switching tacks a little bit to your relationship with Matt, with the founder, how did you align kind of collaborating with his vision, but also stepping into your own command? How are you kind of managing that dynamic relationship?
Yeah, I think honestly, the way that the way that I've managed that is by being very buttoned up in what I ask him for. He's got a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge, and is the company's biggest cheerleader. It's still his baby, But what I found is that he's also an ideas guy. And so if I go, what do you think? I'm going to get 75, ideas, and I'm not even going to be able to process the 7 of them in there that are, game changers for us. So I've really tried to maintain a level of organization and specific asks for him, so that I can get the most for the business from what I see. Now he'll still send me, he'll still call me and has a crazy idea here and there. But I'm very fortunate because he's very self-aware, and he calls and literally says, I have a crazy idea. What do you think? Right. But it's really been about, and I would encourage this for everyone, with the board as well. You go through the board deck. What is the actual ask? What are you asking for in the board deck? Otherwise, it's just a trip to the principal's office. So, I think that the more that you can build these types of cadences where you are building up your questions so that you can sort of get the most out of the time, the better.
Yeah, our most precious asset. For folks that are maybe reporting into a founder CEO at a PE-backed business, and they're kind of juggling the pressure of PE and the demands that the sponsor needs them to make, and then maybe a more creative, less pragmatic founder who's kind of more the ideas guy, what advice would you give them? They're kind of in that vice grip where they know they're driving towards the eventual outcome, but maybe a leader who's less focused.
Yeah, well, I think what I've found is that it's really important to have an agreed framework and structure. So, for the most part, I've used for a decade now a modified version of Traction, Get a Grip on Your Business. But it doesn't matter which one you can use. You could use Rockefeller Habits, whatever. But an agreed to structure is really, really important. And if you're stepping in as the COO or operations person, or if it's from a CRO chair or wherever, the more that you can provide the framework for that founder, the better off you're all going to be, because they're going to then have the information at their fingertips that they need. You're going to have a better ability to get the right decisions made through them, and to keep and maintain a focus. And I think it's better to use something, even if you need to modify it, but that lots of other companies have used successfully, so that it's then not about you. It's not, I have a better way. It's that there is a better way and we're going to adopt it.
Good advice. And Reload obviously pivoted quite a bit. You're maintaining Matt's input. how are you maintaining that kind of the creativity, the entrepreneurial drive, while at the same time, you've very much scaled up, professionalized, buttoned up this business. But how are you maintaining that original DNA of the business?
Yeah, I think a large part of how we've been able to do that is the pressure of the market. So we're in a market that's not doing well. So that means that staying stagnant means we will start to go backwards very quickly, and we all know what that means, right? And so what we have created is we created a couple of committees. So we have various stakeholders that are involved. We have a platform that essentially connects recruiters like Uber drivers to fill roles. So we have a committee with those with select members of those recruiters that come in and do brainstorming with us on a routine basis. We have a client committee. And so we have these, and committee sounds like the least entrepreneurial thing you can do. However, it's the critical starting point for getting feedback for what people want from you. And then we take all of that feedback and say, okay, what are the most innovative things we can do around that? We do that in the quarterly planning process versus on a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. inspiration hit. But we have built out the process to where those inputs and then the regular sort of planning meetings where we get everybody together and we start to think about what's the next big thing that we're doing. It works for us and it keeps people getting reinvigorated. If you're just doing this, I'll tell you this, if you're just doing the same thing and just looking at KPIs every day, compliance is going to fall off. Complacency always makes sure that compliance falls off on those things. So to the degree that you can contextualize to people that, like 90% of our job is, or for their role, it might be different, but 90% of the job is just doing this every day. 10% is where we get to go figure out what's the next great thing and get reinvigorated and excited for the future. Now, again, if you're in development, it's like 80% of your time is on the next big thing, right? And just the more we can contextualize that for people, and the more in any, I'm assuming most people on the phone are predominantly in SaaS-based businesses. The more you can connect the dots to how cyclical the whole thing is from the first touch through to the renewal, the upsell and the attach rates and all of that, for everybody to help them understand their role and understand the one client experience, then the more you can get them engaged in those innovative thoughts and those innovative processes to keep things exciting.
And you touched on this has been a challenging market across the board. I think probably everyone in the audience is struggling. Market dynamics have changed greatly in 2 years. Cost of capital skyrocketed. How are you partnering with your sponsor, with Heritage? Are they very collaborative? Are they jumping in? Obviously, everyone's in line with getting to a good outcome. But how has that process been kind of, maybe the board meetings aren't as sunny as they were 2 years ago. How are you working with them to kind of figure out problem solve to do with the business?
Yeah, so first thing I'll say, plug for Heritage. If anybody has the opportunity to ever work with Heritage Partners based out of Nashville, Tennessee, jump at it. They are phenomenal. And they have been great, which is not to say that they don't hold me and the team accountable, but they are very, very collaborative and very helpful. And a big part of that is in, how are we, particularly using the board meetings, to have specific asks, right? Instead of treating it like a trip to the principal's office to see if we got an A or a C plus or an F, it's going in saying, like, what are the key conversations that we need to have? And how do we drop, how do we pepper those throughout the presentation so that we keep the engagement, get the feedback, and then follow up quickly afterwards to make sure that they know that they've been heard. I will say that they have backed us through some really challenging, issues with changes in our finance team that did not go well. A lot of different things where it was really just communicating with them as a partner, being upfront and clear, oftentimes called swallowing the frog when you got bad news, to get it out as fast as possible. And they've been magnificent at dealing with that. And most of them are, right? It's when you sort of suffer in silence that you end up with real problems.
Yeah. When you said changes in finance, was that talent changes or just kind of maybe the structure wasn't there that you needed in the organization?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's helpful. And you know, we talked a little about this in our prep call. Just being able to, you've done more with less talent, and you've kind of broadened out to Reload's now national, not in Nashville. Talk a little bit about kind of transitioning this business to more of a remote first, and what that looked like in terms of being able to bring on better talent into the organization.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, you can see the Seattle sign behind me. I am based in Seattle. I'm in Seattle today. Our offices are in Nashville. And so it's a pretty deliberate process. I spent the majority of the first 2 months in Nashville, getting to know the people sitting in the office, soaking up the vibe. And then we have sort of prioritized building in Nashville where we can. That's where our owners are. It's also healthcare central for America. So it makes a lot of sense for us to really lean into Nashville. But we have I've worked in remote leadership since 2007, so long before we had to have videos on. And Lizzie, we were joking before the call about how I used to be the master of the mute button when it was, a mortal sin to have some background noise while you're on a call, pre-pandemic. But, we intentionally said we want to get the right talent, and it doesn't matter where they are, right? And a big part of being able to do that is because we have these operating processes that people can count on, and you don't get left out of decision making because you weren't sitting next to the founder's office when he had the idea or she had the idea. So a couple things that, if you peel away the onion even more on that, we intentionally do, culture things like food drives and stuff like that. And we try and balance those between doing the types of culture events that everybody can participate to benefit their local community, but also re-embracing Nashville and making sure that at least half of them are focused on Nashville-based charities and things like that when we're doing that type of community and culture work. I also think that we have been really focused on like our all hands meeting every month and making sure that the majority of the executive team is at the office for that, and that we use those opportunities for circling back to the brainstorming and innovative ideas. We use the on-site time for the types of things that can only be done face-to-face. And so that's built into the rhythm, and that has allowed us to keep the keep the Nashville vibe, but also expand it and add to it and extend it.
So looking at, we got a few questions coming in from our audience. Several folks that are asking either I think this would be more a job bite question, than Reload. But was there ever any challenges with the founding executives that were coming on that disagreed with the vision and strategy, and how did you get to mutual agreement on what the go forward plan would be for those businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was lots of disagreement, and founders have very, very strong points of view. And there was examples of it was very clear that it was time to salute and commit, and we're doing it anyways. And at some point, when you get past being heard and understood, somebody's got to make the decision. Otherwise, you're just going to allow politics to grow. So we've seen that. I've seen that play out directly in everything from the yelling matches, very inappropriate yelling matches occurring, to more Cold War type stuff. And the way you always deal with it is by getting it in the open and making it clear that, again, at the right time, that it is time to salute and commit.
Mm-hmm. And secondary to that, there's a lot of questions coming on managing the cultures from even Reload coming in. You mentioned having change champions. How do you identify people who you see are maybe good team players, look like they can collaborate, and then deploying them in the organization? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's a balancing act, because what you're looking for is the people that are telling you all the things that need to get fixed, and you're also trying to assess whether or not they're coming at it from a really political point of view, or from just making the business better and making sure you understand. So what we did at Reload was we had people fill in an application. Why do you want to be a part of this? And then we I wouldn't say we voluntold people, but then we went to specific people that I identified as clearly, you know, demonstrating the cultural values that I wanted for the organization. And I said, I'd really like for you to apply for this if you're interested in doing it. And so it was a balancing act of letting people apply and then voluntolding some people. Yeah. And when it's in the case of a roll up, it's critical that there's equal representation in the Change Champion Network and the Culture Committee. But equal doesn't mean, well, this company had 75 people and this company had 25, so it should be a 75-25 split. It should still be 50-50 so that you're building a new culture. Because one of the things that if I sort of at some point in my life when I kick my legs up and think back on it, is there is a very real thing, particularly in the roll-ups, where the old company does die. It's dead, and it takes you a while to figure that out while the new thing gets created. But I definitely felt that way. I felt like, what we had before we sold the company was gone. And it took a while for it to go, so it wasn't stark, but it was never coming back, And that's okay. We created something that was even better, right? But having that mindset about it's going to be different and you're not going to be able to hold on to all the same things, particularly if you're suddenly operating on a bigger platform, right?
Yeah. And having metrics, accountability, going from a freewheeling entrepreneurial space to a very numbers driven day in, day out type of world.
Yeah. I was fortunate because prior to joining that platform, we had, because of our large enterprise focus, we had to have operating procedures and all of those types of things where all of the operations of the business were inspected 35 different ways every time we signed a deal. So we had a lot of that just built into our DNA.
Yeah. And do you feel like K1 or Heritage help with the onboarding process? K1 helping with the onboarding process with the targets, and Heritage with you. Do you feel like they were kind of brokering some of that integration?
Certainly, K1 has a very well-established playbook for this. They had a consultant that came in for a couple months that I then took over for. So there was they had a whole program. Heritage was different. Heritage, I think, was really helpful in particularly in preparing for and making sure that the roles were understood. I had clear expectations that I did not want to be, for example, I didn't want the founder to be the executive chairman. I didn't want to report to him. And that was because of all the work I knew we needed to do that I wouldn't have been able to do, given the situations that we had. So they were really helpful in making sure before we signed the agreement that it was set up properly. And then following that, I would say they were highly supportive but not interfering at all.
Mm-hmm. It's the best relationship I think you can have.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. Yeah. Sure.
Peter, this has been a wonderful chat. Before we conclude, is there anything, you've touched on things that you wish you could have done better. You have a wonderful relationship with Heritage, but any other parting words of wisdom you want to leave for our audience as they're thinking about maybe stepping to a first-time founder transition business?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that I'll just go back to what I said at the beginning. Really make sure that you understand what you're getting in for. And again, I think, I had some parameters of what was really important to me. Having gone through the work for 4 years of jamming cultures together, I really wanted to make sure that I was coming into an environment where there was a lot of room to improve the culture, and enough of a platform to do it on. So I would say that's the number one thing, is just to really, really understand what you're in for, and make sure that you understand what parameters that you kind of want to accept, and then question everything. Every time you think, what I would say is, particularly if you're in a business, you're in a COO or president type of position, and you're moving into a CEO role, Especially if you've been where you are for a long time, you know where everything is and you know where all the bodies are buried. I always like to end on my mistakes. The biggest mistake that I made was assuming things, right? So you assume because in all of your previous business history, XYZ is happening, doesn't mean it's happening, right? And so the more you can question everything, and again, I talked earlier about how you can't be the person that's down on everything, but you definitely can and should be the person that's seeking to understand, because that was the single biggest issue. Was I just assumed something was running the way that it's always run in 5 other businesses I've been a part of, and there was cases where that wasn't the case, and we missed the opportunity to optimize things early because of that.
We say here at Falcon, trust but verify. You know,
Yeah.
when the story you did.
And then verify again.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, especially if you're the new CEO that's coming in, the team's going to be fearful. Like, why did the PE firm do this, and the big bad owners, right? And in our case, like I said, this was a very aligned move with the CEO, former CEO and founder. But people don't necessarily believe it anyways. So you have to keep in mind that people are going to tell themselves their own stories. So yeah, how you show up is really important, but it's just verify 3 and 4 times over and try and give people as much reassurance as you can, and as much dependability and certainty in how things are going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Peter, thank you so much for taking time this morning. Our audience, thank you for taking time out of your day. We will see you on the next X Factor.
All right, super. Thanks, Lizzie. Thanks, everybody.
Peter.